Hello everyone, I am Luigi Quaranta from the University of Bari, Italy, and in this video I will present Eliciting Best Practices for Collaboration with Computational Notebooks, a paper that I wrote with Fabio Calefato and Filippo Lanubile. Data science is a multidisciplinary collaborative process in which different stakeholders with varied backgrounds carry out several complex activities ranging from data preparation to model deployment and monitoring. To support these practices, data scientists rely on a wide variety of tools. In this research work, we decided to focus specifically on computational notebooks, the tool of choice of many data scientists. Notebooks are so popular among data scientists because they enable fast and interactive prototyping, they offer a lightweight form of experiment documentation, and innovative communication and collaboration capabilities. Nonetheless, notebooks have been criticized for inducing bad programming practices, like code fragmentation and nonlinear execution of code. Moreover, they offer scarce support for software engineering best practices, even basic ones like code versioning, modularization, and testing. Computational notebooks can either be used individually or collaboratively. In the former case, they are typically leveraged as disposable artifacts for quick data exploration and model prototyping activities. In the latter case, instead, notebooks are shared among teammates to enable collaboration around data analysis and modeling. In such case, notebooks are typically of high quality, or at least they should be, and tend to have a longer life cycle. They are generally stored in a shared repository and kept as a record. In this study, we are specifically interested in the collaborative notebook usage scenario. In particular, since notebooks are used often collaboratively, we asked this first research question: what are the known best practices for collaboration with computational notebooks? To answer this question, we conducted a multivocal literature review, a systematic review of the white literature, that is, the academic literature, but also of the gray literature, that is, any piece of non-peer-reviewed document that we could find by searching the web. So, to retrieve white literature articles, we searched for digital libraries, that is, Google Scholar, Web of Science, IEEE Explorer, and ACMDL. To retrieve gray literature instead, we performed a generic web search using Google. In all cases, we adapted the same search query to the syntax of the search engine at hand. The iteratively refined query included a bunch of synonyms of the term best practice, plus computational notebooks and Jupyter notebook. By best practice for collaboration with computational notebooks, we specifically intend an optimal, high-level, and general behavior that can be adopted to improve how data scientists work together around computational notebooks. To identify the relevant articles and filter out those out of scope, we adopted several filtering criteria, and surprisingly, at the end of the review, we had collected only 3 papers from the white literature and 11 articles from the gray literature. From these texts, we extracted all the relevant excerpts and analyzed them with thematic analysis. Finally, we grouped codes representing best practices into teams, and at the end of the process, we had collected 17 high-level best practices for collaboration around computational notebooks. In this and in the next slide, I will report the catalog of best practices that we collected. The tables are organized by the teams emerged from the thematic analysis, and on the right side of the table, the support of each best practice is graphically represented, that is, the number of articles in which it was mentioned. I will now briefly surface the themes in the catalog. So, the first theme refers to the traceability and reproducibility of notebooks and groups together best practices like use version control, manage project dependencies, and use self-contained environments. The application of these guidelines would ensure that a notebook can be easily reproduced by other data scientists. As it can be seen from the slide, all the best practices in this group have a high support in the literature. Then there is the theme Write high-quality code, that is, code that can be easily shared and reused by others. Here we find standard software engineering best practices, for instance code modularization and testing, along with simpler guidelines, like sticking to a naming convention for notebook files and using relative paths instead of absolute paths. But notebooks are not only code. One of the reasons for their success, actually, is the possibility to document experiments with Markdown formatted text. And this is indeed another theme in the catalog, that is leverage the literate programming paradigm by documenting your analysis and structuring notebooks with addings. These best practices have a high support in the literature as well. Differently, we found a few best practices that occur slightly less in the literature, although being also interesting and well motivated. For instance, some of the articles recommended keeping notebooks clean and concise to make them easy to read and understand. Some others suggested explicitly separating development notebooks, that is, those written for personal use, from production notebooks, those to be shared with the team. And finally, a few articles advocated for open source and open science, and recommend making notebooks and datasets openly available via cloud computing and storage services. Having put together this catalog of best practices, we tried to understand which of the guidelines are actually followed by experienced practitioners. So to answer this second question, we conducted a mixed method study. As a first step, we interviewed 22 data scientists with at least 1 year of professional experience with Jupyter Notebook. We asked each interviewee to share their personal best practices for collaborative notebook writing, as well as those followed by their teams. To avoid any bias, during the interviews we did not share the catalog of the best practices. Instead, we asked for clarification or to speculate further only if they mentioned a related topic spontaneously. To analyze the interview transcripts, we resorted once again to thematic analysis. As a second step, we conducted an archival study analyzing Jupyter notebooks written collaboratively by experienced users of the Kaggle platform. Kaggle is a Google-owned company that hosts machine learning competitions and offers a notebook-based cloud computational environment. We chose Kaggle to build the dataset for this study, as the platform allows the retrieval of high-quality Jupyter notebooks with comprehensive information about their authors and the development history. The interview study confirmed that our catalog is representative of the known best practices for collaborative notebook usage. Indeed, almost all of the guidelines were spontaneously mentioned by our interviewees, and all the practices that they shared with us could be mapped to those already present in the catalog. Moreover, we discovered that practitioners are generally aware of the best practices, but they do not consistently apply them, also because, depending on specific contexts, some of the best practices are deemed unfeasible or even counterproductive. And the reason for this is often the lack of proper tool support. Similarly, our archival study showed that most of the best practices from the catalog appear to be adopted by experienced data scientists on Kaggle. Nevertheless, exceptions exist. For instance, while the use of code abstractions is quite common, testing is surprisingly rare and, overall, code quality is poor. From our findings, we deduce that there exists a tension between the need for a rapid exploration prototyping workflow and the challenge of creating production-ready experimental artifacts. To smooth out this tension, notebook development environments should implement features that ease the adoption of the best practices. Moreover, the recommendations provided to notebook users cannot be general and should be rather adapted to the specific contexts of use. Finally, to foster the adoption of best practices, we highlight the need for notebook-specific linting platforms and testing frameworks. Thanks for the attention.